When I was younger, people assumed the road to wealth was obvious. Work harder, earn more, get promoted, upgrade your life a little, then repeat the process until one day you wake up secure. That is the script most people are handed. It sounds reasonable, it sounds adult, it sounds like the sort of advice a practical person should trust. And it is wrong in one very important way. It confuses movement with escape. A person can work harder every year, earn more every year, look more successful every year, and still remain trapped inside the same machine. That machine is simple. You sell your time, money comes in. Lifestyle rises to meet it, the money leaves, then you repeat. The numbers may get bigger. I have spent my whole life thinking about capital, how it grows, how it gets wasted, how human beings tell themselves they are moving forward while quietly staying in place. And if I had to reduce a great deal of financial disappointment to one sentence, I would say this. Most people try to improve their lives one raise at a time when they should be trying to improve them one ownership decision at a time. That is the real divide, not effort versus laziness, not rich family versus poor family, not even genius versus ordinary intelligence. The real divide is between people who spend their best years increasing income and people who use income to build assets, leverage, and ownership. Those two lives can look similar at first. They do not end similarly. I want you to imagine two men, same age, same city, same kind of education, same early salary. At 27, they look like cousins in economic terms. At 35, they still look fairly similar from the outside. Both work hard, both are tired, both got some raises, both bought some nicer things after the raises, both speak in that modern language of busyness that makes adults feel serious. Then 10 years pass. One man has a better car, a wardrobe that signals progress, a nice title, and a balance sheet that still depends on the next paycheck behaving politely. The other has fewer visible upgrades, a larger ownership stake in his own future, and a financial life that is beginning to breathe without asking his labor to pump every ounce of oxygen into it. That difference does not arrive suddenly. It is built by 10 money moves most people understand only superficially, if they understand them at all. The first move is so unglamorous that most people ignore it. Stop measuring your life by income and start measuring it by net worth. Income is movement. Net worth is accumulation. Income tells you how much money passed through your hands. Net worth tells you how much stayed. Those are not the same thing. A lot of high earners are poor in the only sense that finally matters. They own too little of what grows without them. They owe too much to things that do not produce. They have a large monthly inflow and a fragile life. That is not wealth. That is maintenance with nicer packaging. When a person focuses on income alone, he becomes obsessed with raises, extra hours, promotions, titles, and all the signals that the world uses to flatter work. When he focuses on net worth, the questions change. What do I own? What do I owe? What is increasing in value even while I sleep? What am I building that does not reset to zero every Monday morning? That shift changes behavior faster than almost any stock tip ever could. A person who watches only income will ask, can I afford this? A person who watches net worth will ask, will this move me forward or backward? The first question leads to consumption. The second leads to capital allocation. I trust the second question more. It is harsher. It is less fun at dinner parties. The world does not tell young people this clearly enough. It tells them to earn. It tells them to hustle. It tells them to optimize. It tells them to dream bigger. It tells them almost nothing about accumulation. A person can spend 10 years becoming a much better earner while remaining a terrible allocator of capital. And because the culture celebrates income so loudly, he may not realize the problem until his life is expensive enough that fixing it becomes painful. That is why I say the first move is not make more. The first move is count correctly. There is another subtle truth hidden inside this. Once you begin thinking in net worth terms, spending changes shape. The same purchase that once looked like a reward begins looking like a transfer. From productive capital into decorative living. From future options into present comfort. I am not against comfort. I have always liked comfort. I simply like freedom more. The second move follows naturally from the first. Do not let the first meaningful increase in income become the moment your life gets permanently more expensive. Lifestyle inflation is one of the most socially admired ways to sabotage yourself. People almost never say it that way. They call it progress. They call it treating yourself. They call it finally enjoying success. But in practice, the first big income jump often decides whether the next decade builds margin or destroys it. The reason is simple. The first jump sets your new normal. If your income rises and your spending rises with it almost immediately, then your old financial pressure returns in a more expensive costume. You feel upgraded. You are often just re-trapped. That is the trick. The mind mistakes a nicer cage for freedom, a better apartment, a bigger house, a newer car, more dining, more subscriptions, more little comforts that slowly become perceived necessities. Once those things harden into normal life, future raises no longer feel like opportunity, they feel spoken for. That is one of the saddest sentences in personal finance. The raise is already spoken for. I have known many people who kept improving their careers and remained strangely anxious because every improvement got absorbed before it had a chance to become strength. The first raise should not mainly upgrade lifestyle. It should upgrade structure, cash buffer, debt position, investment habit, tax, advantaged accounts, ownership. Those do not photograph as well as a nicer vacation. They do much more for your future. People think restraint means deprivation. That is childish. Restraint is often just giving the future the first claim on improvement instead of giving the present all of it. That is a wiser arrangement. I am not telling you to live grimly. I am telling you not to let every sign of financial progress immediately become a permanent new monthly burden. A burden repeated long enough becomes your life. The third move is what most people misunderstand badly. Buy assets before you buy upgrades. And when I say assets, I do not mean only the narrow kind the internet likes to romanticize. Yes, stocks are assets. Yes, real estate can be an asset. Yes, equity in a business is an asset. But at the beginning, an asset can also be something that increases your output, your speed, your credibility, your competence, your access, or your range. The public loves to sneer at a young person buying a better tool. They say you do not need all that. Sometimes they are right. Sometimes they are speaking from a life where they never discovered what friction costs. A slow laptop is not just a laptop problem for a person whose work depends on a machine. It is an output problem. A poor microphone is not only a gear problem for a person building a communication business. It is a trust problem. An outdated phone, bad lighting, weak software, low-grade furniture, bad screen setup, miserable keyboard, insufficient internet connection, all of these things can be converted by a clever person into hours lost, fatigue added, and quality reduced. Now, I do not want you to hear this as permission to become a gadget addict. That is just consumerism wearing a productivity hat. I want you to understand a narrower point. An asset is anything that improves your ability to create, earn, or compound. Sometimes the correct early asset is a better tool. Sometimes it is a course. Sometimes it is software. Sometimes it is the kind of clothing that lets you enter better rooms without apology. Sometimes it is training. Sometimes it is travel to a place where your perspective expands. The test is simple. Does this thing improve my earning engine, my optionality, or my ability to acquire productive assets later? If yes, it may be an asset, even if it does not pay a dividend next month. A great many people wait too long to improve the machine that creates every future dollar they will ever earn. Then they wonder why they stay slow. The fourth move is perhaps the most powerful long-term shift. Choose skill leverage over salary worship. This is where many careers separate. A salary is useful. I have nothing against salary. But salary is usually permission-based growth. You wait for the raise, you wait for the promotion, you wait for the title. You wait for budget cycles and manager moods and corporate politics, and whether the institution feels generous in a given quarter. That is a fragile way to improve your life. Skill leverage works differently. When you acquire skills the market values across environments, you stop relying entirely on one employer's opinion of your worth. That is freedom. Communication, sales, negotiation, writing, distribution, technical depth in a scarce area, systems thinking, judgment, leadership. The ability to simplify the complex, the ability to close, the ability to build trust. These are not just nice professional qualities. They are leverage. 1 hour of your work begins to create more value than it used to. That matters more than people realize. A raise helps inside the current structure. Leverage travels with you. That is what makes it powerful. If you improve your capacity to persuade, to explain, to build, to distribute, or to solve expensive problems, you become more valuable in more places. The world begins bidding different. A person obsessed only with salary negotiations may win a little more from the current employer. A person obsessed with skills that multiply value improves his bargaining power everywhere. I would rather own bargaining power than gratitude from one employer. That is another important difference. Many people think the route upward is working harder inside the same role. Sometimes it is. Often the better route is becoming dangerous in the market sense, meaning your mix of skills becomes so useful and so flexible that the next opportunity begins finding you faster. That is what skill leverage does. It turns you from a worker filling a slot into a producer of outcomes other people want access to. The fifth move is one most employees consider too late. Negotiate for ownership, not only for wages. Salary pays you for time. Ownership pays you for scale. That sentence alone can change a life. If all of your economic life is structured around wages, then you remain trapped in the linear model: more hours, more effort, more responsibility, then perhaps a little more pay. There is nothing wrong with being paid well. There is something incomplete about stopping there. The wealthiest financial jumps often do not come from salary increases. They come from ownership moments: a stock grant, a profit share, a small stake in a growing business, a revenue participation agreement, a carried interest structure, a piece of something scalable. The public underestimates ownership because wages are emotionally concrete. Ownership is often abstract at first. That makes it easy to dismiss. A person says, "I would rather have 10,000 more in guaranteed salary than some uncertain equity." Fair enough. Sometimes that is the right answer. But a career built only on cash today can leave a fortune on the table if you are operating near something that is growing and you never ask for a piece. This is especially true early at the right company or inside the right project. I have watched people think far too small about this. They negotiated hard for salary and never once asked what part of the upside they might earn if the enterprise itself succeeded. Ownership thinking asks a different question. If I am helping build value, where do I participate in the value once built? That is the question. Many people are too timid to ask it because they feel they have not earned the right, or because their environment taught them to be grateful for wages and not curious about ownership. Those are expensive lessons. You do not need to ask recklessly. You do need to ask consciously. The sixth move is to get closer to capital itself. Money behaves differently depending on where you stand. Far from capital, you experience it mainly as pay. You do tasks, you get paid. Someone else makes decisions about allocation. Someone else decides where the profits go. Someone else decides what gets funded, what gets acquired, what gets expanded, what gets financed. You live downstream from capital decisions. That is where most people remain their whole lives. They work hard inside systems whose real financial decisions are taking place in rooms they never enter. Now, a person can live decently like that. I am not insulting honest work. I am saying something more strategic. If you want to move faster financially, it helps to move closer, because once you are near capital, you stop seeing money as salary only. You begin seeing how it moves. You see how deals are structured, how assets are bought, how companies are financed, how expansion happens, how returns are measured, how risks are priced, how ownership thinks. That exposure changes your mind. You stop seeing money as something earned and spent. You begin seeing it as something positioned. That is a revolutionary change in thinking. It can happen in finance, of course, but it can also happen in operating businesses, real estate, startups, acquisitions, partnerships, any world where decisions about capital are being made rather than only labor being exchanged. If you can place yourself near those decisions, even without being the richest person in the room, your education, the room teaches you. A person far from capital often thinks in budgets. A person near capital starts thinking in allocations, returns, cost of funds, upside asymmetry, and ownership structures. That is how the game changes. The seventh move is to understand asymmetric risk. This is one of the most powerful concepts in all of wealth building, and it is almost never taught correctly in ordinary life. Most people think risk means the possibility of loss. That is too crude. A better way to think is this: what is the downside if I am wrong? And what is the upside if I am right? If the downside is survivable and the upside is meaningful, you may be looking at an asymmetric opportunity. That is where a great deal of life-changing progress hides. Learn a rare skill. If it does not transform your life immediately, you still gained capability. If it works, your income can change meaningfully. Start a side business with modest cost. If it fails, you lose time and some money. If it works, you build an asset or a new income stream. Join a smaller company with ownership potential rather than taking a slightly higher salary in a place where the ceiling is low. You carry experience elsewhere. If it works, the upside can overwhelm years of ordinary raises. This is how a lot of financial leaps actually happen. Not through safe linear steps alone, but through small controlled exposures to large upside. Most people avoid these because uncertainty makes them uncomfortable fare. But certainty is often where mediocre outcomes live. The trick is not to gamble stupidly. The trick is to place limited bets where the downside does not kill you, and the upside can move your life materially. The public often calls this risk-taking. I prefer to call it intelligent exposure. Risky behavior is taking huge downside for modest reward. Intelligent exposure is taking contained downside for significant upside. They are not the same thing. The eighth move is to use debt for acquisition and never as a tool for ego. Debt is emotional for many people. It should be respected. It should also be understood properly. Most people encounter debt as consumption. Credit cards, personal loans, car payments beyond reason, buy now, pay later purchases for things that will be forgotten while the payments remain. That kind of debt is not a tool. It is future income being auctioned off for present comfort. It reduces flexibility. It reduces optionality. It makes the next year weaker to make this month feel slightly better. I dislike that trade intensely. But not all debt is morally identical. Debt used to acquire a productive asset can be different. If debt helps you control something that produces income, appreciates sensibly, increases your output, or expands your ability to build wealth, then you are no longer in the same category. You are using capital structure. That does not make the decision automatically wise. It still has to cash flow. It still has to be sized safely. It still has to survive adversity. But the intention is different. Debt for acquisition can work with you. Debt for ego works against you. That is the line. Most people never learn it because the culture speaks about debt emotionally rather than structurally. The right question is not only, am I borrowing? The right question is, what is being acquired and what future claims does that acquisition create? A luxury car financed for status is not the same as borrowing against a productive asset at a rational spread. One weakens the balance sheet, the other may strengthen it. Intent and structure matter. The ninth move is to enter rooms above your current level. Environment is one of the most mispriced forces in human life. People think they need more confidence. Often they need a better room. The people around you quietly define what feels possible, what feels expensive, what feels normal, what feels ambitious, what feels unrealistic, what gets discussed at dinner, what gets joked about, what gets admired. A person can spend years in an environment where nobody talks about ownership, equity, capital, negotiation, building, or leverage, and eventually he begins treating the absence of these topics as normal adulthood. Then he enters a different room and discovers that people here speak casually about things his previous environment considered exotic or impossible. That matters. A better room does not need to flatter you. It needs to stretch your assumptions. When you enter a room above your current level, discomfort is natural. Many people call that feeling proof they do not belong. It is often proof they are finally near growth. You do not need to pretend to be the smartest person there. You do not need to posture. You do not need to fake fluency. You need only curiosity, observation, usefulness, and enough humility to absorb a different ceiling. That is how ceilings move. A person who stays only in rooms where he is already comfortable often keeps the same life longer than he realizes. The room is training him every day. A larger room trains him differently. And finally, the 10th move, the one all the others are secretly aiming toward. Transition from labor to ownership. This is the real crossing point. Everything before it prepares for this. The skill stack, the restrained lifestyle, the asset purchases, the equity negotiations, the asymmetric bets, the productive use of debt, the focus on net worth instead of income. All of it is preparing you for one transformation. The moment when what you own starts doing more of the work than what you do personally with your hands and hours. That is not an anti-work statement. It is simply the structure of freedom. As long as all money comes only from labor, you remain attached to the machine physically. You can earn well, you can be respected, you can have a wonderful career, but the structure is still linear. You stop, the inflow stops, ownership changes that, a business, equity stakes, rental income from well-bought property, dividends, broad market ownership, profit shares, royalties, licenses. Anything that continues producing because you own a claim on output – rather than merely because you showed up today and sold another unit of time. This is the final difference between earning a living and building wealth. Most people never fully make the transition. They improve the wage side of life but never build the ownership side enough to matter. Then they wonder why they always feel they are one interruption away from pressure. The answer is that labor alone, no matter how noble, is not the end state for financial freedom. Ownership is, once ownership grows large enough, your economic life changes its center of gravity. You stop asking only, what can I earn this year? You begin asking, what did my assets earn? And when that second number becomes serious, the game changes permanently. Now, I do not want to mislead you. This transition does not happen overnight. It is slow enough to test your patience and quiet enough to tempt you into thinking it is not happening. That is why most people fail. Not because the model is wrong, because the early stages are visually unimpressive. The first dollars of ownership feel tiny. The first dividends feel decorative. The first investment gains feel too small to change identity. The first profit shares do not look like liberation. That is the test. The test is whether you understand that the machine is being built before the machine becomes obvious. A person who keeps building through the unimpressive chapter eventually reaches a very important threshold. The assets begin contributing enough that labor is no longer carrying the entire structure. That is when your life gets interesting in the best way. Not because you stop working, because you stop needing work to do all the work alone. I have often said that if you do not find a way to make money while you sleep, you will work until you die. People quote that because it sounds sharp. They should study it because it is structurally true. The world does not owe anyone financial freedom for being diligent. Freedom is purchased through ownership. That is the only lasting mechanism I have ever seen. So when I look at these 10 moves, I do not see a checklist. I see a migration from income thinking to balance sheet thinking, from comfort spending to asset buying, from salary dependence to skill leverage, from wages to ownership, from working around capital to standing near it, from random risk to asymmetric bets, from borrowing for image to borrowing for acquisition, from familiar rooms to stretching rooms, from labor only to labor plus assets. That is how people really pull ahead, not in one leap. In a sequence. The world loves dramatic stories because dramatic stories sell better. But most financial escape is built through a string of quiet, strategic decisions that do not look exciting while they are being made. That is perfectly fine. I have never needed my decisions to look exciting. I needed them to work. If you are young, or even if you are not, the lesson is not to memorize these 10 moves as slogans. The lesson is to recognize the direction. You are trying to move away from dependence on time sold directly and toward claims on output that continue beyond today's labor. Every smart move belongs to that direction. Every foolish move works against it. A nicer lifestyle purchased too early works against it. Debt used for comfort works against it. Rooms that keep your expectations small work against it. Skills that make you more employable but not more valuable in the broader market only partly help. You must keep asking the same question. Does this move increase my ownership, my leverage, my optionality, or my earning engine in a durable way? If yes, good. If no, it may be consumption disguised as ambition. That distinction matters more than almost any financial ratio. In the end, wealth is not a salary level. It is not a title. It is not the appearance of advancement. It is the number of productive claims you own and the amount of future labor those claims make unnecessary. That is the cleanest way I know how to say it. Once you understand that, the fog lifts. The first raise no longer looks like permission to spend. It looks like seed capital. A better tool is no longer a luxury automatically. It is potentially part of the earning engine. A negotiation is no longer only about pay. It is about upside participation. A room is no longer only social. It is an environment that reprograms your assumptions. A risk is no longer simply scary. It may be asymmetry. Debt is no longer simply bad. It may be leverage or poison depending on what it acquires. And your career is no longer only a ladder. It becomes a bridge toward ownership. That is how I think about it. Not because it is fashionable, because it is true. And truth in finance has a funny quality. It often feels boring right before it proves extremely expensive to ignore.